welcome back to Put the Metal On. My name is Dave Cullen. We're back once again for a metal music review. Today we're going to be talking about the 7th studio album, Give Us the Moon, from the Night Flight Orchestra. This record, released on January 31st of this year, offers a rich tapestry to 70s and 80s melodic rock influences, delivering a polished and cohesive musical journey. That's what they say about the record, of course, but before we get to that, let's talk about the Night Flight Orchestra heading up to this record, starting with their origins and early identity. So the Night Flight Orchestra was formed in 2007 as a creative outlet for Soulworks' Bjorn Street and arch enemies Shirley D'Angelo, both known for their work in melodic death metal. This project was a stark departure, fully embracing the sounds of 70s and 80s album-oriented rock, blending influences from classic acts such as Journey, Toto, Foreigner and the Electric Light Orchestra. Their debut, Eternal Affairs, was a strong statement of intent. They showcased their deep love for their retro sound, but it wasn't really fully defined. While their songwriting was solid, it leaned more towards straightforward rock rather than polished cinematic authenticity, which they would later define them. They had songs with potential such as Westroot Avenue and Glowing City Madness, but overall Eternal Affairs felt like a fun side project rather than a fully realised band. Their sophomore effort, Skyline Whispers, on the other hand, marked a clear step forward. It retained its classic rock essence, but this time injected more flair, more layered synths, and stronger songwriting. Tracks like Living in the Nighttime and Lady Jade signaled the band's growing confidence, yet they were still finding their balance between homage and originality. But then the breakthrough came from their 2017 record Amber Galactic. This is where they really came into their own. It wasn't just a great rock revival album, it felt like a true reinvention of the genre in the modern era. The band fully embraced their sci-fi themes, waving in cosmic themes and lush Sith-driven soundscapes. Songs like Dynamo and Something Mysterious demonstrated a newfound confidence in their ability to craft infectious cinematic rock anthems. This album also gained some real industry recognition by nominations for awards, big tour opportunities, and a growing fan base, solidifying them then much more than just a side project. If Amber Galactic was the breakthrough, then Sometimes the World Aren't Enough was the logical next step. It doubled down on its same formula really, big choruses, glossy production, and over-the-top 80s nostalgia. Songs like This Time and Lovers in the Rain were irresistible, but some critics and fans were starting to notice that the band were maybe playing it a little safe. While the album was fantastic, it felt like less of an evolution and more of a continuation on the back of Amber Galactic with minor refinements. Then came Aeromantic, which was arguably their most ambitious album at the time. Ambitious in the sense that it was a more refined and mature version of their sounds. While still rooted with album-oriented rock, it had a much stronger emphasis on both storytelling and atmosphere, with songs like Servants in the Air bringing a sense of adventure, while other songs, for example Taurus, being one of their more progressive compositions yet. The album also introduced the backing vocalists of Anna Bygard and Isa Goldman, adding an extra definition to their sound. Their presence gave their music a much richer, more theatrical feel, and they became a defining part of the band's live shows in particular. That being said, the issue of stagnation became harder to ignore. While Aeromantic was an excellent album, some tracks, particularly Golden Swansdown, felt like variations of things that the band had already done. Fans loved it, don't get me wrong, but here was the growing question: how long could the Night Flight Orchestra keep making the same type of album before everything starts to feel repetitive? Then came Aromatic 2, which, as the album's title suggested, was a direct sequel to its predecessor. And while the record had some really good songs like Burn For Me or White Jeans, it felt like this album really solidified that they were settling into their comfort zone. The production was really slick, their hooks were very catchy, but that sense of wonder that defines their earlier albums was nowhere near as strong. It got to the point where some fans were really starting to suggest that they were in danger of becoming too formulaic. Not that they were losing their magic per se, but that surprise factor was dwindling hard. And bear in mind that by that time the band have released 6 albums in 9 years. With that type of output, while it's very impressive, there is that risk of creative burnout. And rightly so. I mean, bear in mind it's not just a fun side project anymore, it's a fully fledged band with proper expectations. So going into Give Us the Moon, they were really at a crossroads. They had definitely mastered their niche in the genre, Their musicianship and production quality was at an all-time high, and they had built a really dedicated fan base. However, the big challenges that they were going into is that the repetition issue was definitely becoming real. Could they really bring something fresh, or be just another well-executed but predictable album? How would they keep things engaging for an album-oriented rock nostalgia wave, which some could argue is losing momentum? And some fans just wanted more risk, something like the unpredictability of an Amber Galactic. So by the time we got to 2024, the Night Flight Orchestra had really established themselves as one of the best modern bands celebrating classic rock nostalgia. Their musicianship and their dedication to their craft was unquestionable. But the biggest question is whether they could keep evolving, or were they just becoming victims of their own success, repeating themselves without much growth. And this brings us to Give Us to the Moon, an album that had the potential to either solidify their greatness or expose their limitations. With that being said, now this album deserves very careful attention. It's going to be, because this album could really be a make or break. It could be a really critical moment in their career trajectory. Let's talk about it further on by starting off with the overall composition and cohesion. So the album is structured with a very clear sense of movement, beginning with the atmospheric final call intro, which smoothly transitions to the energetic Stratus. This sets up an optimistic and clearly cinematic tone that carries through the rest of the album. However, while most of the transitions feel very natural, there are a few moments though where the jump, for example, from Melbourne May I to Cosmic Tides that feel very disrupt, making certain parts of the album feel slightly disconnected. I will say one of their biggest strengths to this album is the ability to stay rooted to Night Flight Orchestra's signature album rock-oriented meet disco rock sound, while offering enough variation to keep the album engaging. For example, Paloma introduces a slower, moodier, dynamic type of sound, while Way We Spend the Night leans more heavily to nostalgia-infused rock. But also, there's a good few tracks that feel very similar. For example, Lost in the Neon and Time Will Wait all feel very similar in their pacing and structure, causing a slight dip in momentum around the album's midpoint. And while the album does overall avoid feeling too long, sitting around 50 minutes, it does have a few moments that drag. As I said, the more mid-tempo songs in the second half of the record kind of slightly dilutes the energy built up by the first half of the record. Perhaps if there was a more dynamic placement of the ballads versus the high energy anthems, it could probably overall improve the pacing of the record. Let's now move on to the songwriting and arrangements. Now, Night Flight Orchestra thrive on hooks, and of course this album is no exception. For example, Melbourne May I has an infectious chorus that really stands out, while the title track Give Us to the Moon delivers a nostalgic synth-laden hook that really sticks in your minds. However, there's some songs that rely on more predictable melodies, such as Way to Spend the Night and Cosmic Tides. Don't get me wrong, they're very enjoyable, but that doesn't mean they're very unforgettable either. And while the songwriting is very strong, of course, there's some tracks that probably appear to a bit too closely to more album-oriented rock. But there are also moments where the true structural surprise, for example, the unexpected instrumental break in Stratus, getting very rare. You don't really hear it too often in these records. I feel if there was more unexpected tempo shifts and a few progressive elements, it would really add more excitement to the album. In terms of emotional impact, the album successfully balances uplifting anthems with more introspective moments. For example, Paloma stands out as probably their most emotional song, carrying a bittersweet undertone beneath its smooth veneer. But then there's other songs like Lost in the Neon, for example, that don't quite hit the same level of emotional resonance. It feels more like an obligatory slow moment rather than a standard track. Now, historically, Night Flight Orchestra have always leaned on escapism, romance, cosmic adventure in their lyrics, and of course this record is no exception. For example, Give Us to the Moon always lodges with travel, longing and dreamy nostalgia. There's also some lyrics that I feel are too on the nose. Like, for example, we are lost in the neon looking for a sign. But overall, it does fit the band's theme, and they don't distract from the listener's experience much, so it's not the biggest criticism at all. Now let's talk about the performance and musicianship. From a technical standpoint, it's very tight and very polished. The guitar work from Rasmus Urnborn and Sebastian Floslund is very impressive, but with tasteful solos and well-layered rhythm sections. Joan Lommere's keyboards play a major role in defining the album's character, providing a lush retro atmosphere that elevates even the weaker tracks of the album. And while the musicianship is undeniable, there's a slight tendency that some of the songs feel too polished, almost to the point of sterility. For example, tracks like Cosmic Tide I feel could have benefited with a bit more looseness and a bit more of an organic energy, particularly with the drums. The Orange Street delivers another solid performance on vocals and showing impressive range and control. His ability to transition from smooth croning to powerful amphoratic belting is very commendable. But there's also certain tracks like Time Will Wait where I feel his delivery is just a slight bit too strange though. Perhaps if there was a bit more grit and rawness in select moments, it would have made the vocal performance a bit more compelling. The drum and bass lock very well throughout the album, with Jonas Killsback providing a driving and controlling backbone. However, in the mix I feel the bass occasionally gets lost beneath the layers and synth and guitars, and unfortunately that's one of the dangers when you have so many high volume or high key instruments like that, where, as I've said so many times, the bass can easily get lost everywhere. So I do feel a stronger presence in the low ends could have given the songs a lot more groove and impact, particularly Give Us to the Moon. Speaking of which, let's talk about the production and sound quality. As I said, the production is very clean, glossy, undeniably professional. Each instrument is balanced well. The album overall has a warm, very full-bodied sound. I feel this is the case with a lot of records. There's times when I feel it's almost too polished to the point where it's almost ultra polished, and it takes away from some of the raw energy where I feel it could make some of the songs hit a lot more harder. The guitar tones are rich, era appropriate, evoking classic rock and 1980s glam influences. And as I said, while the bass is very well played, it could have used that boost where it could have enhanced the low end and added more weight to the songs. The drums sound crisp, but as I said, it feels a little too polished. I feel if it had a bit more of a natural sound, like a live room sort of feel, it could have really enhanced its sound. The vocals are clear, well placed in the mix, but I also feel, especially because of in the synth heavy moments, it could have been pushed forward a lot more, where you almost couldn't hear it sometimes because of it. And while the synths and reverbs are tastefully used, helping build up the album's dreamy atmosphere, there are some moments where I feel they could have benefited by using slightly less reverb, for example, making the performances feel a bit more immediate. With that being said, let's talk about now the creativity and originality of the records. So Night Flight Orchestra walk a very fine line between homage and innovation. And of course, Give Us to the Moon continues in that tradition by delivering a sound that feels both classic and modern, which you don't hear every day nowadays. And while the album is fun and very well crafted, it doesn't push their sound forward in any significant way compared to their previous efforts, I feel. There's no question the band proudly wear its influences on their sleeve, as I mentioned, with clear nods to Toto, Journey and Foreigner. And while they do a fantastic job of capturing that vintage feel, I sometimes feel it takes away from them trying to be unique on their own. It's almost like it's too much of a tribute to these influences. And while the band stays comfortably in its lane with melodic rock with some light disco influences, I feel if there was a bit more risk-taking, particularly incorporating more progressive and unexpected elements, that surprise factor that they had for Amber Galactic, for example, could have really helped differentiate the album from past records too. This finally brings us on to the replay value and impact of the records. There's no question this album has some really solid replay value. I, for one, had a great time listening to this more than once. But I will say it doesn't stray away from its previous formulas. It may not have as much staying power, I feel, from its stronger releases as a result. The standout tracks for me be definitely Melbourne May I, catchy, well executed, packed full of energy. Give Us to the Moon is by far the most cinematic track, while Paloma I feel is their more beautiful, melodic highlight for me. So while this album for me doesn't necessarily redefine the album-oriented rock revival scene per se, it definitely reinforces the Night Flight Orchestra's status as being one of the very best in what they do. So while it's a very solid and enjoyable release, it does not break new grounds. But you know what, I kind of don't care because I enjoy this album so much. It's one of these acts that for me, you know, keep doing what they're doing. While I'd like them to do new things, I'm not complaining whatsoever. Which brings us to our final verdict. I mean, it's a well-executed album, very polished, incredibly enjoyable, and delivers exactly what fans expect. But I do feel if it was a bit more adventurous in their songwriting, a little less glossy in their production, It could have really elevated them to the next step, if you ask me. However, if you still love your nostalgia, if you still love your late synth rock, this is definitely a worldwide listen. It's this close to being a masterpiece. I feel they're definitely on the right track though, but until then I enjoy this step into their journey. And that's another review, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Forgive me about the darkness here now. I'm doing this at a more later time than I usually would have liked. But nevertheless, if you liked today's video, please give it a like. If you'd like to see more videos here from Put the Metal On, please give us a subscribe. And please express how you think of the record. Did you like it? Did you not like it? What do you think of my perspective? Do you agree or disagree? Please let us know. We'll be back very soon in the meantime with some more metal music albums. We hope to check you out then. In the meantime, I've been Dave Cullen. This has been Put the Metal On. Please stay safe and enjoy the metal.